things on or live streaming yet or no? Are we ready to go?
Yeah.
Up and running live?
Great. Let's see if I can get anything together.
One sec, Tusken.
Kim, great seeing you.
I was hiding.
Yeah, did you want to come up here or do you want to? Okay, yeah, for sure. Appreciate you coming. I think I'll turn my phone off. You ready to go or no? Everyone ready? Yes? Good? Oh, great. Well, I appreciate all of you folks coming out. We have a couple different things we want to talk about, not necessarily related. But first and foremost, one of the reasons that we wanted to have everyone come together is to talk about some of our new responses to 911 calls for service. As we know, or as has certainly been reported by many of you, we have a staffing shortage. We're 22 officers short. And so what that has done for us is to evaluate the types of responses that we are going to, things that we're doing that perhaps we don't need to have a licensed police officer go to. Some of this has been an evolution that's been happening for years that has really got us to a point where we now feel that it's in our best interest to make some changes. So I do not want to certainly make people believe that we're in a crisis by any means, but we also, this is an opportunity anytime that you have a position where you have staffing shortages to drive better efficiencies and effectiveness. And so most importantly, when all of us pick up the phone to call 911 and we have an emergency that we are going to report, most important response that we have of all the things that we do is to be responders to 911 calls for service. If there's nothing else that we do, we have to be able to be ready to be able to respond in a timely manner to people who are calling for our help. And so some of these changes that are so that we will have the capacity to be first responders, to be there for those emergent calls for service. And so some of those changes that we have that I want to speak about specifically are one of the things that happen in Duluth, partly because of our geography and weather, is we have a fair number of car crashes in this city. Most of those, fortunately, do not result in injury. For years, we've been going to car crashes and doing investigations A to Z. So we go, we do all the reporting, we do state reporting, we do actually go above and beyond what's required from us from statute. And so those are very time-consuming, especially when we get into periods of time where we have weather events. And so oftentimes we look at best practices that have happened not just here in Minnesota but across the nation, is most police departments have migrated away from that level of response to when there's not a crash involving injury, that the officers respond, they check people's licenses, they check to see if there's a violation of the law, and ultimately give people information to exchange information so that they can work with their insurance companies to have their cars repaired. That's more of a typical response. The Duluth Police response over the years, we have just done all of that. And it's one of those things that are very time consuming and is really taxing our capacity to continue to provide that level of service. So one of this is pretty rudimentary and simple. Looks like this accident information card, kind of walks people through the process of you've been involved in a crash, here's the things that that you have to collect. On the back, there's driver vehicle information. And so this makes it pretty easy for us to hand out when we've done our part. And that is, again, responding, making sure people have insurance, seeing if there's any violations, running people to make sure they have valid driver's license. Here now is your part in this, is to exchange information, to report this to your insurance company, because the insurance company is going to need all of this information that's on the back side of this card. So it is important that we find, again, efficiencies and effectiveness and allowing us to do what our primary job is. When you have an emergency, you call 911, you're going to want a professional response and a timely response, and we're going to be able to provide that better by making this change. And so that's one of the items on my list to speak to today. I want to talk about some other efficiencies that we've been driving here for years. Historically, we used to have authorized to have 6 CSOs, so those are community service officers. Those are the folks, when you just come in the door here, you see often behind our desk. We were very fortunate that the city allowed us to increase our CSOs from 6 to 12. Those CSOs are typically law enforcement students or graduates of law enforcement. They work at our desk just outside here. They work for investigative units. They do a lot of the details that we do not have to have a licensed police officer to do. So some of our minor reports they will collect. They will collect property and evidence for us. They will run any number of administrative tasks. We've had them go through reports and collect data for statistical record keeping. So there's just a lot of different experiences that these students get. Why that's valuable to us is not only is it helping us have really, really good people who have been trained to help our community, but it also is one of our #1 ways that we do recruiting. So many times these folks that we hire as CSOs, we ultimately have an opportunity to test drive them, to see their work product, and ultimately hire them as police officers. So it's really kind of twofold. It helps us in recruiting for our organization, but also allows us to have people who have had training to be able to do some of the reporting that that people are coming to us in reporting or administrative tasks. And so I think that is an initiative that we've gone from 6 to 12. That's very, very helpful. One of the other items I want to promote is our e-reporting or online reporting. So if you have an event that happens and there's no suspect information, currently we have on our website, we have the capacity to do e-reporting. So you don't need to call a police officer. It will prompt you for the information that you provide. You can't mess it up because it won't submit if you don't fill out the blanks. You submit it, and then it automatically comes into our record system, and we have the capacity to get a report without sending a police officer. I think it's important just to note, again, when we're talking about building efficiencies and effectiveness, it's not that if you call, we're not going to come for those things. They also recognize we triage our calls for service. If it's not a event that's happening now, if it's something that happened, you don't have a suspect, we will likely get to. You may end up talking to one of our CSOs. You may talk to an officer at a later time. But if you have the capacity, you can do online reporting when there is no suspect on our online reporting. And so I think it's important, again, for those who have the capacity or want to be able to connect and do a report without having to call 911 or have a police officer or talk to one of our CSOs. Next, we have our light duty officers. As many of you know, police work is hard on the human body. At any given time, we have people who are on light duty who are either pre or post surgery or are mending from injuries. We have now engaged those people as well to be looking at our calls for service board and be taking 911 calls over the phone where we can. Again, ultimately that is much more efficient and effective for us to see a call come up, know that it's a call that you could take by phone, reach out to the reporting party, collect information. You won't see an officer, but you can can talk to one on the phone. Another way that we're finding efficiencies to take calls off the board that officers who are on the street that our first responders would otherwise have to respond to. And so that's just another way that we are looking to build efficiencies. And finally, the recruitment and retention of our officers. Actually, I'm on a break right now. In the next 20 minutes, we have another candidate coming in for interviews. So we've been interviewing 22, I think we had 21 people that we've been interviewing who came to the Chiefs finalist panel. We call it the Chiefs panel. So we're in the process yesterday and today to interview 21 candidates. So the interviews we're about 3/4 of the way through. There's been some really, really bright, shiny stars and some people who we know really fit our organization well. And so we're hopeful to, out of this, these next 2 days, to get 10, 12 candidates to hire. And so that's also part of the equation is continue to make our department an attractive place to find the very best people to do policing and bring them to our organization. And so we found some really, really good candidates. And that's the next piece of this, is that we are, of course, actively recruiting all the time. We hire laterals year-round, and we hire new students, at least this year. It'll be probably a couple times this year. So that's kind of all the things that go into, when I say driving efficiencies and making us more effective. Those are some of the ways that we're doing that. Again, primarily we want to be there for your 911 call if you need us. We want to be there in a timely manner. We want to be there with a professional and comprehensive response. So I think I'll segue into, well, how about this? Does anyone have any questions about that before I move into item number 2?
I have a quick question. Is that the 22, 21 candidates, is that the normal amount that you guys see, or is it a little below?
So we, last year, I want to say we had like 42 applicants. This year, I think we had 36. We went through already part of this process and brought forward 22 of those people to be finalists. Of that, we go again through and pair through and see who fits our organization. Remember, as I've said times before, last year we hired 4 people and we needed 8. So we don't hire just to hire. We hire people who fit our expectations, that fit our requirements, fit our character-based hiring. So right now it's looking very favorable. Although we had less numbers, we have some really, really good candidates. We're hopeful to hire 10, 12 people. That's really is based on really our capacity to hire. If we hire more than that, it gets really difficult for us to be able to train them. So good question, but yeah, that we're actually in a pretty good place with these folks we've seen so far in the last 2 days. I got about 5 or 6 more this afternoon. I'll have to circle back to you and let you know how that all works out.
We use the example of the car accident situation where you can be more efficient there by handing out these cards. How much time is that going to save? What is an average car accident?
Yeah.
And what kind of time are we talking?
Yeah, Krista, that's a great question. So, and your average crash, not only is there the response time to go there, and of course then you do the regular checks, but oftentimes what we were doing is the state reporting. So the state reporting is a little bit more laborious. And also remember, they're trying to do this report while they're being called to other things, so there may be starts and stops. So what we found with our officers is that if you're really efficient and do it all the time, it can be a 30-minute savings. But there are officers that tell you that it's 45 minutes to an hour, especially if there's interruptions. And so you're doing a state report in a situation where the reporting part of it after the fact is actually where a lot of the time is put into. And it is made worse by, of course, interruptions. Other questions about driving efficiencies? Good? Good on that? Okay. So before I forget, I do have our county attorney Kim Mackey here, and she's going to have an opportunity to speak as well to talk about gun violence. I just wanted to make sure that we had this press conference today and included this. As you know, there was a recent spate or uptick of shootings just over the weekend. I'm really going to focus on a couple things. Collectively, over this year, we've had 20 shooting incidents. 6 alone in June, 7 in April. I'm going to focus most of my comments on the incidents that happened so far in June. So going back, as I say that now, to the beginning of the year, we have 6 accidental shootings or shots fired incidents that have happened, and I think it's important to make sure that people are really careful when handling their firearms, and I want to just go through some of these scenarios where firearms have gone off. So dating back to January of this year, accidental discharge while cleaning a firearm, shot a friend in the foot while playing with a handgun, accidental discharge while putting a gun in a holster, cleaning gun, shot through the ceiling and hit another person in the leg. Another one, cleaning gun, accidental discharge. This one was at a local hotel. And then finally, the last one, and this one really doesn't meet those categories. So we have a fight at Aces, gun drops on the floor, somebody goes to pick it up, shoots another person in the foot. That particular event is under investigation. We are still looking for 2 suspects in that. We would certainly like to know if anyone knows who they are or has any information to reach out and share that information with us. You can be anonymous and call our Violent Crimes Unit. But we would certainly like to get some further information about that. That one is kind of an anomaly because we really don't know quite what that was. Somebody has a gun, somebody's in a tussle, gun hits the floor, somebody else comes, tries to pick it up, shoots somebody in the foot. A lot of things going on there that we want to have answers to that we don't. And so ultimately that one is under investigation. If anyone has any information about that, we certainly would like to know more details about who and what happened there. So those accidental discharges, you can see the theme that develops there. And so these are all, again, of course, incidents where they're very serious. People are getting hurt. We're having rounds going off accidentally. We need to be, of course, if we're going to be gun owners, we have to be very, very careful about how we handle, how we clean firearms. And so I think it's important, just a reminder to see this isn't something that is an anomaly that just happens once every blue moon. We have 6 of them this year that we've had incidents where people have gotten hurt and or rounds were shot when people certainly were not handling guns safely. Next, kind of talking about where we're at with their June shootings. So on the 8th of June, in the 500 block of 4th Street, there's shots fired. We do not have suspects on that incident. That one happened right near that intersection of 5th and 4th Street. Anyone, of course, having any information on that, we would, of course, like to have somebody share information about who is responsible for that particular event. No one was injured or hit on that one. Next, there is an incident that happened on the 2600 block of West 3rd. Contractor working on a house, here's some screaming, here's a shot, somebody runs out, gets into a car, flees the scene. We are, of course, looking for information about who was responsible for potentially that shooting and or would it be a witness or give us further details on that. Additionally, I'm sorry, another one of certainly of concern on 6/18. This one happens at 1942 hours, 7:42, 400 block of East 7th Street. There's a fight on a DTA bus. people getting off the bus, and then immediately there were some shots fired. On that one, we have suspects in that event, and we ultimately, it's under investigation. If anyone has any further information about that particular shooting, we certainly want to have information again to button these up, to close these out, to hold people into account as well. And I think finally, on our list, again, I know I've already talked about the ACES event. That one is, of course, really important for us to get information about who is responsible for that event. It really was, with a crowded bar, there was nothing but tragedy that certainly could have happened. It's really unfortunate that somebody was injured. It certainly could have been far worse. And so those are just some of the shooting events that I want to speak to. There was another one. Last one happened on the 20th. That one was somebody who is experiencing a mental health crisis and had a shotgun, and so that one we have solved. It's under investigation, but we know who is responsible for it. It's just certainly was very unfortunate. Somebody was experiencing a mental health crisis. So. With that, it's important that when we talk about response to gun safety, the important thing is to do interventions and meaningful interventions before we have actual shootings. So one of the important items that I think it's important for folks to note is we're not waiting for shootings to happen. So we will have recovered, our Violent Crimes Task Force has recovered 10 firearms so far this year. Our patrol officers have recovered another 10 firearms, so a total of 20 firearms. And we are actively, when we have people that are suspects in these shootings or we know are carrying guns illegally, we are doing investigations on the front end to prevent these incidents. It's important for all of us in our community, if we know people who have guns that are illegal, who are maybe perhaps people who are threatening with guns, there's an opportunity to give that information to us on the front end anonymously so that we can do meaningful interventions so that we don't have tragedies. We know that in America there's over 400 million guns. There's more guns than there are people in this country. Unfortunately, one of the very unfortunate parts about gun violence is many times people who shouldn't have guns, prohibited, are getting guns, and they're getting guns because oftentimes they are stolen from people who are law-abiding citizens because they're either not secured properly, don't have gun locks, aren't in gun safes, are stored because they have permits to carry and find out what every cop in America knows, that carrying a gun around is uncomfortable. So when you get out of the car, instead of putting it in a safe place, where do you put it? Underneath your seat or in a console? Car gets broken into, gun goes. Store guns not safely in your house gets broken into, guns are taken. Businesses, we've seen businesses burgled and also have guns stolen, and they end up on the streets. So one of the things that is important for our community to remember, if you have guns and they're not safely stored and they're stolen, the likelihood is that those guns are going to end up in the hands of people who should not have guns, who ultimately are going to make it more dangerous for all of us. And so it's important to do, very, very important to store your guns safely, to keep them locked up, and it will help us be safe. It will help us keep our community safe. Because we see one of the more recent events we had, task force made an arrest just yesterday. I think, did we do a press release on that?
No, it's in the notes.
Oh, it's in the notes. I'm sorry. So we recovered a couple of these guns just the other day, and so one of them, of course, is stolen. And so that's, again, just as I said, so we end up catching somebody with a gun, the gun is stolen. It's kind of really a tired tale that we see too often with guns, is they end up in the hands of people who shouldn't have them and ultimately pose a risk for all of us in society. So with that, I don't think I have any more comments. I was going to kind of lead into to introducing Kim, one of the things that we also have to do is Kim and I have had conversations about how important it is for us to have prosecution hold people accountable. So if you're going to have guns and you're not supposed to have them, or you're using guns, or you're pointing guns at people, we want to have a county attorney and a prosecutor that's going to hold people into account. Kim and I have had these discussions, and she is a great partner with us, and I just want to allow her to have some comments about what their office is doing when we are able to put together an investigation and refer it to the county attorney's office. So with that, Kim, come on up.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm not as old hat as Chief Tusken over here with press conferences, so if I screw up, I hope you don't hold it against me. But in any event, I was happy that Chief Tusken asked me to come speak today, because I do think the public needs to know a little bit more about our office's stance on firearm offenses and how we handle them. In our policy manual, we have a separate policy for firearm offenses because we think that they're so important. They're so critical to the safety of our communities. Few crimes pose a greater risk to our communities and to our law enforcement officers who protect us than firearm offenses. And so we have taken this position to have this specific policy with two objectives. One, to maintain a safe community through aggressive, consistent, and coordinated enforcement of gun laws, and two, to ensure those who engage in firearm offenses are held accountable. Part of that aggressive stance is that we generally don't negotiate or offer plea agreements on gun charges, and we won't agree to departures from the sentencing guidelines for firearm crimes. When we believe there is or could be a danger to the public, we seek significant bail. So for people that have been in the system before with gun offenses or are being picked up and have had some dangerous criminal history, we ask the court for significant bail. Ultimately, it's the court's decision, though, whether significant bail is set. But in any event, and at any time, we're ready to assist law enforcement with the investigation of these offenses and to go through the criminal justice process with them. We have, as part of our policy, a prosecutor on call at 24 hours a day to assist with investigations if necessary. We want to make sure the investigations are conducted in a way that's legally sound so that we can make sure that the cases that we bring have the greatest opportunity for success at the courts. We're ready to review cases that are ultimately referred to our office for charging, and we're ready to charge cases based on our charging standard, which requires enough evidence for there to be a reasonable likelihood of success at trial. And finally, we're ready to vigorously litigate these cases throughout the entire court process and to seek justice for those who have been burdened by these crimes and to hold those to account that own guns illegally, that use them illegally, and that hurt others. Like Chief Tusken said, though, we all have to work together to reduce these firearms crimes. So if you have any information about any of the crimes that he discussed or other people or situations where there is illegal firearm activity, please reach out to law enforcement, whether that's DPD, the task force, or your local law enforcement agency. We all have to work together to keep our communities safe. And I just wanted to, before I leave the podium here, thank our law enforcement partners for all the great work they do. They're out there every day putting themselves at risk to keep us safe, and I think that they need to be recognized for that. So thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, they'll probably call you back up here again,
Okay,
Kim, so
I'll
don't
stay
go too
here.
far. So appreciate, again, Kim is a great partner, and it's important that we have that accountability piece. We do all that work building cases. We want to make sure that we have somebody who is pursuing those prosecutions as aggressively as we are doing the fact-finding and investigation, and Kim is in her office is all of that, so we appreciate that. So questions about any of that?
Yeah, so how does the number of calls to service for gun-related incidents compared to other years this year? And then also, like, specifically with accidentally discharged firearms?
Yeah, so there's some analysis that we could get back to you on there. I will tell you that we oftentimes hover right around, at the end of a year, right around 20, 22 of these events. Year to date, we're at 20. Our high was in 2020. We saw 41 incidents where there were shots fired or shootings. And so we kind of use that as a watermark for really high. Right now we're at 20, so we're halfway there. But it is something that ebbs and flows, and it is not always easy to tell why that is. One of the things we know does contribute to these is that when we have these events, like when they jumped off the bus and started shooting, one of the things that contributes is oftentimes reprisal shootings. So there's shots fired, then you'll have another group will be shooting rounds back at the others. And so those are some of those events that get really dangerous and deadly, is that we want to, as I said, we're not waiting for these things to happen. When we identify people who may have guns, we do surveillance, we could do targeted enforcement in neighborhoods, and we are looking to do interventions before we have tragedy. And part of that intervention is relying on our community, who oftentimes knows information, that they have the courage to share that information with us so that we can do an intervention to keep people safe.
Can I ask, out of all the guns that you've acquired, have any of them been like a ghost gun at all? Do you know?
I don't have that information right now, and I don't know if Chad, or Dan, if you guys know off the top of your head. But it certainly is something we're seeing as guns that are literally built off of 3D printers, or you can get guns now that are not serialized, that they come as a kit, and then you put them together, and they're allowed. Actually, that's a loophole in our gun legislation, and I think it's important that if you have a firearm, that there's going to be a serial number on it. Just because it comes in a different form or fashion, you have to assemble it, you shouldn't be able to have a gun that doesn't have a serial number on it. And I know that there's certainly federal and state legislation that's probably going to be, I would guess, coming up, and rightfully so on that.
I guess I'm just curious about like reoffenders, or people who, you often do see involved with these crimes. And with the legal situation, do we tend to kind of get it figured out, or we often see this kind of regroup where those people come back again and maybe involved with similar things afterwards?
Yeah, so, it is the criminal justice system. We do focus, and I say we by me and Kim, and we try to, of course, have our partners, focus on recidivist behavior. The most unproductive part about the criminal justice system is when you have investigated, held somebody accountable only to see them reoffend, figuring out ways to get people out of that pool of being reoffending. Sometimes that's longer sentences, more harsh sentences. Sometimes the person is suffering from mental health or substance abuse. Whatever that is, we have to be more effective, because what doesn't work is having somebody cycle through, be held accountable, come out and do the same offense the first week they're out of jail or out of treatment. And so it is something that we really do focus on. And I know that certainly Kim could speak to that in her office. There is a system in place where we look at points of previous offenses, and you get more significant sentencing guidelines will say you get more time, but just jail isn't the only solution to this. Jail is one part of it, and we're glad we have that opportunity to use that on certain offenders. And there's other offenders who we have to certainly look at what's the underlying cause contributing to these events. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, perfect.
Other questions?
Yeah, I know you said you were able to trace one gun back to being stolen. Is there like a percent? Is that the only one you found that's been stolen?
That was the most recent one from just a day ago.
Do you have a percentage of how many?
Yeah, I don't right now for you, but I will say that, of course, any gun we collect, we will run the serial number. We will try to figure out, is it an owner we can get it back to? Is it, what's the origins? Where did it come from? We also have partnerships with the ATFE, who has the capacity for us to run checks that we don't. And so we do have a comprehensive partnerships with federal agencies as well that allow us to have a more robust response. It's a good question. Anything else? You've had enough of me for today? Okay. Kim, anything? Okay. Well, very good. I appreciate you folks coming. Important message for us to be able to convey to our community today about how we're going to be efficient and also how we're going to keep people safe. So thank you.
Thank you.
Huh?
I need to get our...
I know. I'm running around here like crazy.